Hello and welcome to Design Education Talks podcast by the New Art School. Our guest today is Graham Fink. Welcome, Graham.
Yes, good morning. Very nice to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. So tell us about you and your work.
Well, that's a big question. I'm very difficult to pigeonhole because, I work in the creative fields, but I'm like a creative director. I'm an art director and a writer. I'm also a multimedia artist. I do a lot of photography and painting and drawing. I also designed some technology to allow me to draw just using my eyes. So I work a lot with technology. I'm an agent to some robots. Sophia is perhaps the most famous. You probably know of her, designed by David Hansen. So I'm her agent, and I'm a musician. I'm a director. I've made a lot of music videos, a lot of commercials, some short films, and I run a shop. I run an art gallery and a vintage store, and I run these creative sessions to help young people get into the business of creativity. And I have a new one next week, funnily enough, at the UK Festival of Creativity. So a lot of stuff.
Excellent. So, we can focus, we'll talk about everything, but we can also focus on your education work. Tell us about Fink Different.
So Fink Different is, obviously it comes from my name. When I was growing up, people used to take the piss out of my name. I don't think I want you in my football team and all that stuff. I was very young at school. But after a bit, I grew into my name and my name grew into me because it's different and it stands out. And that is really one of my main philosophies. Everything I try to do, it needs to be different, stand out, because most things look the same. And a lot of companies, when they start, they don't really think about their point of difference. In advertising, of course, you really need to have a strategy that points out your USP, your unique selling proposition. Position yourself how you're going to be different. So Fink Different was a course on creativity for business, meaning whatever business you are in, it doesn't have to be the creative business. You could be an accountant, for instance, or a lawyer or a dentist. But I believe that creativity should be at the heart of your business, which allows you to be different from your competition. So it was a course I wrote. It was like a 3-week course with pre-recorded video on me talking about pretty much everything. And then I would do a live Q&A each week for the 3 to 4 weeks. And I've run that very successfully the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And now I'm going to re-record it all and upgrade it a bit for later in the year or next year.
Excellent. You've been talking a lot about the art school. And this is something that's very close to the New Art School, the podcast, to my work. So tell us about this.
So the art school, again, is something I started 20 years ago. It was really designed to help young people, students, or young people working in the business, to help them sort of break in and just give them a lot of help, a lot of mentorship, guidance, and tell them a lot of things that they wouldn't be learning in conventional sort of art schools, colleges, universities. And typically it was a session that would last sort of 3 to 4 hours, one morning, one afternoon. It was always in a different location. Sometimes we had it in a nightclub, or it could have been in a cinema, or it could be standing outside the forecourt of a Texaco petrol station. And in fact, the last one I did before I moved to China for work reasons, I ran actually in the Houses of Parliament. And I had 150 kids, students in the Houses of Parliament. And we had, we always have amazing guest speakers, 2 or 3 guest speakers from different backgrounds, advertising or fashion or acting. I once got Gary Oldman, the actor, to come and talk to us about working with Francis Ford Coppola. So it was an amazing sort of morning for these young people wanting to come into the business, and they learned so much. we would often team people together. We would look at their work. We would give them crits and as well as talks. So it was quite extraordinary. And then over the years of doing that, there's hundreds and hundreds of, probably thousands, have gone through the doors who are now, because it was a long time ago, all now sort of in big positions. They've either got their own agencies or they're running agencies or whatever. So, a fantastic group of people, and I'm in touch with quite a few of them. But then I moved to China, which was my advertising work. I was in China for 7 years, and I moved to Seattle. I was in New York for a bit. But I've been back in the UK since the pandemic in 2020, and I've decided to relaunch the art school. So the first session is going to be next week in Margate as part of the UK Festival of Creativity. So really looking forward to that.
Fantastic. So tell us about how all this ties in and about your proposition to creative education.
I don't really have these grand strategies. I tend to do a lot of things just off the cuff. I think, let's do this. I'm very good at just making things happen. I don't just have an idea and then I just leave it and nothing happens. I do work quite hard to realize them, so that they manifest themselves into some form. Even if it's not in the original form that I wanted, something will come out of it. So to me, it's all about ideas and about creativity. So whether it's running an art school, whether it's working in advertising for clients, whether it's my own work as an artist, whether it's photography or painting or the eye drawing, it always comes out of ideas and trying to do it differently to everyone else. I guess that's what holds it all together.
You've spoken about being passionate about learning. You've said whether it's reading a random book or relearning guitar with Elliot Fisk. So how does this structured curiosity inform your creative process?
Well, I think, learning is very important because, I think the human mind is, or just say the mind doesn't have to be human, is born to be limitless, not limited. And there's an expression, jack of all trades, master of none, which I really hate. And I think it's probably one of those sentences that has probably destroyed more self-beliefs and more people's potential than any other sentence ever written, because I believe that you can get good at many things. You may not be an expert at and great at everything, but I believe you can get very good at a lot of things. And the more different things that you learn and you discover about, you can start to cross-pollinate them in your work. So, as a musician, I'm learning to play the classical guitar, for instance, and you can say, well, what has that got to do with painting? What has that got to do with advertising? But what I find is I use many musical analogies in the work I was doing. That's something that has started since I've been learning the guitar. It could be that you, as a hobby, you get into gardening and you might know nothing about gardening, but once you start, you might want to grow some tomatoes or whatever. You can go on YouTube and you can see how to grow tomatoes, and you can start getting very much into the type of soil you're going to grow these tomatoes. And you suddenly discover there's lots of different types of tomatoes. I always remember my granddad giving us a yellow tomato when I was a kid, and I'd never seen a yellow tomato before. So there's many different types of tomatoes. So suddenly the world of tomatoes gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start learning about the different types, the different brands, the different types of soil. If the insects come in and start eating your tomatoes, you're going to learn about different insecticides, and then should you be using them, or is that bad for nature? And I love just going into these kind of rabbit holes, if you like, and learning more about it. And then sure enough, something to do with tomatoes or soil will make its way into my guitar playing or whatever. As weird as that may sound, but I love these, when you take areas that are seemingly very, very far apart. It's like throwing two stones into a lake. You might throw these two stones in like 20 meters apart, but at some point the ripples will overlap, and that's where the magic can happen. When I went to China to run one of the world's biggest creative departments. I had hundreds and hundreds of people under me. We were making films, we were making posters, we were doing social, we were doing digital, we were doing PR, all kinds of things. But there was a big difference between the way I thought and the way the Chinese thought. And I like this sort of East and Western mashup, the mix. And in China, they were very interested in Western thinking. And so they loved the West. They would study the West. They would want to think like the West. And I'm going, I'm not interested in that. I've come to China. I want to learn about the East. So there's this weird thing that's happening. We're both trying to learn about each other's cultures, but inherently I am Western and inherently they are Eastern. But I think that's where, again, interesting things happen. It's like these clashing of opposites. And that's where really great ideas can come from.
Absolutely. You also mentioned about drawing with your non-dominant hand to spark fresh ideas. Could you give us an example of something unexpected that's come from that?
Yes. So, I mean, most people are right-handed. I'm right-handed. Funnily enough, my father is left-handed. I wish I was left-handed. But if you're right-handed, you tend to control a paintbrush or a pen, or even if you're just writing, you use your right hand, your dominant hand to do these things. Now, I believe if you swap the pen or the paintbrush or whatever it is into your other hand, and you start to draw or you start to write, or even just doodle with that, different things happen because you're using a different side of your brain. And I often also draw blindfold because if you can see what you're doing, you're correcting what you think are mistakes. And there's all this judgment going on. And you're constantly judging whether something is good or not. And I believe a lot of these judgments, again, get in the way. And they're beating us up. They're telling us that we're not very good. And in the West, we're particularly good at beating ourselves up. I'm no good. I shouldn't say that. People will think I'm stupid, or what will people think, etc. And I think that's a huge stumbling block. I kind of call it friendly fire. It's sort of like where its own side shoots you sort of accidentally. It's called friendly fire. And I think that, if you're drawing blindfold, for instance, you get out of that because you can't see what you're drawing. So you can really, really enjoy the process. You suddenly get into the emotion of drawing and the feeling of drawing rather than the judgmental side of drawing. And then when you open your eyes at the end or you take the blindfold off, you might be pleasantly surprised. Now, the great thing is if the drawing is terrible, you've got a wonderful excuse because you can say, well, I couldn't see what I was drawing. But when I've done this exercise with a lot of people, and I've done it with big, highly paid, very important people with big titles in corporate companies, not from creative backgrounds, although I do believe everyone is creative, but people are absolutely gobsmacked when they see what they've done, because I believe I can get stuff out of people that surprises them.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've also spoken about throwing a spanner in the engine and killing off Ziggy Stardust success. So what advice do you have for designers, creatives who feel stuck, or or for students who really want to improve themselves?
Well, it's just a little bit about what I was just talking about. Sometimes we get sort of too precious, and sometimes it's really important just to sort of throw caution to the wind and let things go. We are always judging ourselves, and yeah, sure, there is moments where you need to have that. But I also think it stops a lot of creativity. So if you are stuck for something, you've just got to let something go. Or perhaps the best thing is go and do something completely different. Go to the theatre. Like Sherlock Holmes, when he couldn't crack a case, he would take Watson off to the theatre, or he would go and play the violin, and then he would crack the case. And it's often that happens when you're sitting up in an office and you can't crack the problem. You just go off and you go for a walk, or you go and get a cup of coffee, or take the dog for a walk, or whatever. And it's often in those moments when, the big idea just comes to you. which is
Absolutely.
interesting. Now, you've got to ask why is that? And I also have a theory that, I've asked this question in many, many seminars all around the world, different countries, different cultures. And I always say to them, when do you get your best ideas? Is it sitting at a desk coming? And pretty much everyone says no. And when is it? And they say, well, it's often when I'm in the shower, or I go for a walk or I'm doing something. And so then I ask the question, so what is the difference then between when you're trying to do something and you can't do it, and then you go off and you do something else and it just comes? And everybody says, well, it's because you're more relaxed and all the rest of it. But I keep driving that question. I say that's not the answer I'm looking for. And it takes a long time. Eventually someone will get it, and sometimes I have to help them. But I point out to them that when you are trying to do something and you cannot do it, and then when you are not doing it and you're not trying to do it, the answer just comes to you. Therefore, you can't claim it as your idea. And then everyone, oh, the ego doesn't like this. People say, oh, but it is my idea. I said, no, it's not your idea. You couldn't do it. You had your go. You couldn't do it. So I love that. It's not your idea. Now, the minute you stop claiming things, actually, it really frees you up. Because if then you show this idea that you got in the shower to your creative director and they say, well, that was done before. It was done in America 10 years ago for, whatever. You don't feel quite so bad, right? Because you sort of think, okay, well, I found this idea and I like this idea that, they're not your idea. They're all out there. Anyway, you've just got to go and find them. You've got to catch them. So you can say, well, I'm going to go and find another one, which I like that, rather than I'm going to come up with another one, which sounds very pressurized. I'm just going to go and find another one. So, yeah.
Do you also feel like boredom, or like, there's no boredom anymore because social is killing off boredom?
Well, I think, I don't know. Is there anything, my parents would say to me, if you're bored, it's because you're being boring. And it's, you're not asking the right questions. You're not showing interest. So the next time you're bored, start being interesting, and then you won't be bored.
No, what I'm saying is, like, people used to do interesting things because they were bored.
Yes.
They were trying to find something interesting to do but now we're killing off the boredom with the devices.
Yeah.
No one is bored. So we're not trying to find something interesting to do or to create anymore, in a way.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So you've worked with robots like Sophia and AI Da, developing the eye drawing software you mentioned. So how do you see the role of tech in regards to creativity?
Feeling lost in the noise of social media? Inspo cuts through the clutter, connecting you directly with real insights from real experts and industry leaders. It's a new social network dedicated to knowledge sharing, industry insights, and thought leadership. Get the latest from top minds in your field, or build your own thought leadership portfolio on Inspo. Already trusted by thousands of professionals worldwide, be part of the conversation and download Inspo Experts today on the App Store or visit www.inspo.expert.
Well, that's, again, a very big question. I mean, everybody is talking about AI all the time. Funny enough, I'm doing a webinar about it tomorrow. I gave a talk to some students last week about it, and it will be coming up, I'm sure, in the art school next week. I mean, I think that, without going so deeply into it, because it's a massive, massive topic, but I think, we're living in a very exciting time. I use some of the AI tools to help me with my work. I can't rely on it for ideas, but I will spar with it. I work with ChatGPT, but it's not enough to, they say slop in, slop out. If you just ask it very generic sort of questions, it's not going to give you very interesting stuff back. But if you actually spend quite a long time briefing it or working on a brief, and your own time working on that really, really tight brief before you ask, your AI, let's say ChatGPT in this case, then it's going to give you a much, much better answer because, you've given it all the sort of parameters. You might ask it to write an article as if it was someone who really understood, let's say someone like Steve Jobs. And then you've got to get it to not only write, Steve Jobs might talk or in his style, but you've also got to give the type of audience that he's talking to. So there's a big difference. Are you talking to school children? Are you talking to 16-year-olds? Are you talking to people in the C-suite who've got their own agencies? And as much information as you can put in, as much, we have that expression, for the freedom of a tight brief. If you give it a very, very tight brief, it's going to give you much, much better sort of thoughts. And so I spar with it quite a lot, and it will give me stuff, and you sort of think, okay, well, it may not be great ideas, but it's enough to spark me off and for me to come up with some ideas. And then when I may type all my ideas up and I will put that back into it, and obviously ChatGPT is sort of programmed to make you feel fantastic. It keeps telling you that you are amazing and your ideas are fantastic, but I will put it in and say, what is wrong with this? Give me some critical thinking, point out all the negatives, the things that won't perhaps work with this idea. So I like to do that. I sort of like to challenge the way it's sort of programmed and get it to sort of to think quite hard about it. So often if it comes back with something, I say, you haven't given that enough thought. You've instantly given that back to me. I want you to really, really think about your answer. And have another go, and it may come back with something else. And then I'll say, hey, has it been a long day for you? Have you had a lot of prompts today? Because this answer really isn't good enough. And I will keep feeding it back. And a bit like working as a creative director with a creative team, they come in with something and I say, look, this is really not good enough. You've got to go and have another go. So if you do that, 2 or 3 times, you will find that you get much, much better answers. So it takes quite a long time, to do this, but it's really worth it because, I really enjoy the process. It makes me think, and I'm making ChatGPT really think. As I say, I often, I never take what it gives me. Absolutely. I always go off and work with it, but the fact that it can make me think. So I use it as a creative partner.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be more interested in what ideas AI is rejecting. Like designers, what are you rejecting in order to select? Because in a way, it makes us think like there's only one answer. But as you know, in creativity, there are 5 billion answers for the same question.
There are 5 billion answers. And, somebody then has to make the decision. And that is me in my, whoever it is. Yeah. But in my case, it's me as I'm playing creative director, So you could be pitching ChatGPT and you can have Gemini on the other in the other window performing its sort of tasks. So it's kind of like having more people in your creative department.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've spoken about creating safe environments, going back to the ideas, for wild or stupid ideas. So what practical steps do you take to cultivate that mindset with students or teams?
What, to get them to come up with stupid ideas, you mean?
I mean, yeah, the environment or the,
I think,
process.
Everyone is pressurized into thinking they've got to come up with great stuff all the time. And of course, that isn't possible. I mean, how many great ideas does one really have in a lifetime? I mean, it's really small. We have lots and lots and lots of ideas, not that many great ones, hopefully a lot of very good ones. But I think the way to get there is when you can really experiment and really play. And you need to have that time. And that's one thing that is really slipping away. When I first started in advertising, you would have like 6 weeks to come up with let's say a TV script. And, these days you're lucky if you get a week and you're expected to come up with great stuff. And, that's not going to happen. And you need that sort of incubation time. You need to sort of be able to go away and think about stuff, write it down, give it the overnight test. The joke these days is it's the over lunch test. And I see this as being a real problem. And with things like, with AI coming in and ChatGPT that's giving you instant answers, as we just said, that aren't particularly great, certainly first time round, then a lot of clients are thinking, well, we can get stuff very quickly now. And of course, that's the client's goal, is they want ideas faster, quicker, cheaper. And they know that you've got things like ChatGPT giving you instant answers. So what is important as a creative director or someone in charge of your own sort of ideas and content that you're creating is you've got to keep fighting for the time, and you've got to keep pushing back and say, no, we need a bit more time. Because, the first ideas, sometimes they can be great, but most of the times they're not. And you really need time to develop stuff, to think about it, and also to craft things. So I think when everyone's just jumping to ChatGPT for a quick answer, it's going to be a real problem, because a client may say, yeah, that's good enough for me. And this is when the difference between good and bad clients. You need good clients who will push you and say, it's not good enough, come up with something better, rather than, yeah, that'll do. And if everyone keeps saying, yeah, that'll do, and it's going to be, that's when it gets really bad, because we're just going to see lots and lots of mediocre stuff. As you know, you can prompt into things like Runway now, video, you prompt in your video prompts and you get like your 10-second clip, and you do that a few times and you've got your 30-second commercial, or you've got a short film. And, we're not too far away from having a whole feature film made in just like a couple of days. So, and as it's going to get better and faster, in a year or two's time, I can see when there's going to be the release of, millions of feature films every day. Now, there's a problem, because which ones are you going to watch? I'm sure a lot of them are not going to be that good. It's just coming back to why you need a really great idea at the center of it. And so I can just see this world of mediocrity. A million feature films every day. You think about that. Millions and millions of books being published every day.
Who's going to watch them?
Who's going to watch them? Who's going to read them? Well, the point of it, who's going to remember them? Again, it's going to be the really great ones, as always, that rise to the top. But, I think if you look at the world of advertising now, I watch the TV a lot and I see a lot of commercials. I think most of them are really bad. They're not very well made. The strategy isn't very good. The idea isn't very good. I look at posters on the side of the road, and the posters is actually one of my favorite mediums, because I think it's something really instant. You should be able to look at a poster and get the whole thing in just a couple of seconds. And I like the fact that you could take something very small, like a drawing pin, and you can blow it up huge on a big poster, and you would see it in a very way in which you haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you take a photograph of a car and you put it on a poster site, it's pretty much the same size that you see a car anyway. So that's not really doing that much for me, unless you've got a great headline. But I'm just seeing a lot of not very good stuff everywhere. And it's not just me saying this. And it really bothers me. Where is the great... It's one of the reasons I've started the art school again, saying to the new generation, come on, please help us.
Do you find that young creatives have this anxiety for finish over ideas, for process, fancy tools rather than ideas? And I find that there's a lot of finish, which is all the same.
Yeah.
So how can we help young creatives?
No, I think that's true. They come, they're leaving college with all their software skills, and they can make everything look nice, but that's not good enough unless it's got an idea in it. And, ideas are really difficult. Really good ideas are really difficult to come by. So that's one of the reasons I'm starting this thing again, is to train them how to think creatively, how to think differently, look at what everybody else is doing to start with, and then try and do something different. A lot of the time, people aren't even looking at what the competition is. They're just going straight into the answer. I think I was reading something about Einstein the other day, and he said if he had a really difficult problem to solve, he would spend 55 minutes on the thinking and 5 minutes on the solution, which I thought was great. People are rushing into the solution too quickly and not really thinking through the whole problem. Because people, I think on the whole, human beings are generally pretty lazy. We try and cut all the corners. We don't like doing hard work. How can we sort of get round it? How can we sort of cheat? Give me the cheat sheet. Thinking stuck in a room with a couple of people trying to work on a problem is very difficult. It is painful, but you need that thinking, because that is why once you do that, you can go off and have your walk or your shower and the idea will come in because you've done all of this thinking.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for current established education institutions that you could say that they could do something different?
Yeah, come to the art school. Well, I think it's not really people. It's not really about blaming people and people's fault. We're all so conditioned from the moment we're born. We are conditioned into doing things a certain way. Like we all tend to get up in the morning. We all go to bed late at night. We tend to have our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. While office hours tend to be sort of 9 to 5, unless you work in creative industries, which it sort of never stops. But we are conditioned. There are so many systems in place that we just go along with, and we don't even think about it. And it's quite good to sort of turn the lens back on yourself and look at these things. Look at how we are conditioned. I think it's I quite like asking the most basic questions. It's like, who are you is one of the most basic questions, but one of the most difficult to answer, because people often say, if you say to someone, who are you, they will give you their name and they will tell you what they do. And of course, that isn't really who they are. If you ask people how they are, they always say fine, but most people aren't fine. There's a lot of stuff going on. But if you ask someone how they are and they sit and tell you all their problems, you often say, look, I've really got to go. So we're not good at listening to people's problems either.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to add, an advice you'd like to leave us with, something we haven't spoken about?
I don't know. We seem to have talked about quite a lot. And that's what I like. When I have conversations with my friends, we always tend to talk about lots of different things. And I think that's really interesting. I think if you're building a network of friends, look at your friends and think, who isn't, what sort of type of person don't I have in my friends? Oh, they ought to tend to be these type of people, and they all tend to have these types of jobs. And therefore you might think, what I really need in my circle of friends is someone like a neuroscientist, for instance. Well, I don't know a neuroscientist. Well, let me go and find a neuroscientist to be friends with, and then bring them into my group, or it could be, I don't know, a landscape architect, a landscape gardener. That might be someone to bring in. So, I think the best dinner parties you have when you have a group of very different people around the table with lots of different types of views and and that sort of diverse thinking. It sounds a cliche, but it's true, because if everyone just sits and talks about politics all evening, it's pretty boring, I find.
Well, thank you so much, Graham, for coming to the podcast. Keep in touch. Thank you so much.